Good evening, everybody, and a big welcome to you to the Atlanta History Center. I'm Gordon Jones. I'm the military historian and curator here at the Atlanta History Center. Thanking y'all for coming out tonight. Tonight's book is the late Frank Murphy's classic memoir from 2001 called Luck of the Draw, about the 100th Bomb Group in the 8th Air Force and his time as a German POW. It is one of the most gripping and compelling memoirs of the war that we have. And it's just been released with the new introductions by his daughter, Elizabeth Murphy. She's a children's book author who still lives here in Atlanta. And his granddaughter, Frank's granddaughter, Chloe Melas, who you may know from CNN. And we are also mighty pleased tonight to have Ann Murphy, Frank's wife, who is there down front. Thank you for being here. And remember also that copies of books are available at 25% off tonight only in the lobby following the talk, right? Now, tonight our conversation with Elizabeth and Chloe is led by my old friend and comrade, Glenn Kyle. And Glenn is presently, but not for much longer, the executive director of the Northeast Georgia Regional History Center. I say not much longer because as of tonight, he is on the verge of going into private practice, working a new gig with a marketing firm, which if you know anything about museum directors, you know that they do a lot of fundraising and promotions, which means this is a perfect job for a former museum director, only it pays a whole lot better. So congratulations to Glenn. The other thing you should know is that Glenn and I worked together here at the AHC for about 8 years in the late 90s and early 2000s when Glenn curated our exhibition, V for Victory, Georgia Remembers World War II, which marked the 60th anniversary of the end of World War II. The exhibit ran from 2004 to 2006, and we displayed some of Frank Murphy's artifacts, very powerful artifacts. And during that time, Glenn had the privilege of meeting and interviewing Frank Murphy. And I have to say that of all the World War II veterans that we met during that project, Frank probably left the biggest impression on us. A truly kind, honest, and wise man. And in that exhibit, we had a sort of a memorial space in the Howell Gallery. It was sort of meant as a contemplative area. And we ran a film on a loop in that gallery in which the veterans that Glenn had interviewed tried to sum up what the war had all meant. And by the way, you can still see that film and the other interviews on our website. But Frank Murphy gave what was easily the most profound insight of all. So much so that Glenn chose it as the closer at the end of the film. And in his slow and calm and matter-of-fact voice, Frank Murphy said, "One of our inalienable rights as Americans is to ignore or forget the past. It's only the tyrannies in this world who compel their people to remember the past, and for the most part, it's an evil or unsavory past. Americans can remember or forget the past as they wish. And the right to forget the past was one of the things the men and women that I served with fought for. It's the right to forget us. And for that reason, I think the World War II generation deserves to be remembered." That's why we're here tonight. Thank you. Glenn, Chloe, Elizabeth.
It is. It's the best spot in the house, ladies. Thank you so much for being here with me. There are some other people here too, but I'm interested very selfishly in learning more about you and talking about the amazing person and the amazing experiences of Frank Murphy, who meant so much to me when I was here with the Atlanta History Center. And I know we've got some great stories to talk about tonight. We have some amazing retrospectives and insights from family members. But first, to get things started, we have a special video.
7 weeks after Nazi Germany declares war on the United States, the U.S. Army's 8th Air Force is activated at an armory in Savannah, Georgia. Its mission? Transfer to England, create a heavy bomber force, defeat Nazi Germany through high-altitude daylight strategic bombing. The 8th Air Force will become the largest air armada ever committed to battle.
My name is Frank D. Murphy, M-U-R-P-H-Y. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia on September 9, 1921. I grew up in Atlanta and spent all of my life, well, not quite all of my life. I had 2 years in Cleveland, Ohio in 1929 and 30 during the Depression. It was the only place my father could get a job, so we went to Cleveland for 2 years. We came back to Atlanta in 1931. I was in Atlanta up until the war started in December of 1941. I knew that very likely I was going to get involved because several months before that they had revised the draft requirements so that anyone from age 21 would be subject to the draft, and we knew that eventually anybody my age who was healthy was going to have to go into the military. Well, I decided that if I was going to go into the military, I wanted to go into the U.S. Army Air Corps, which had just recently been changed to the U.S. Army Air Forces. The name had been changed in June of 1941. I was a student at Emory University at the time of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and I had gone out to the airport in Atlanta and taken flying lessons, and had soloed in a little Piper Cub, and I flew and I enjoyed flying, so I knew that when my time came, I would want to go into the Army Air Forces. We could see our own airplanes going down, getting shot down, and it was just a frightening sight. Some ME-109 fighter aircraft came in, and one got in behind us and shot us and killed our tail gunner, and then started 2 fires in the airplane, one in the radio room and one in the number 3 engine. I looked around and I saw the co-pilot coming down from the flight deck, and he motioned for me to follow him, and he pulled the release handle on the forward escape hatch. It fell away and he jumped out, and I thought, oh my goodness, we've got to go. So with that, I managed to get my parachute on, and I went back and I followed him out the door. I fell for not terribly long. At 20,000 feet, I was anxious to find out if the parachute was going to work. So I pulled the D-ring, and fortunately it did work. Before I hit the ground, I realized how fast I was falling. When I hit the ground, of course, I sprained my left ankle very, very badly. And while I was there struggling to get out of my parachute, some German farmers came up, and a lady standing there said to me in perfect English, "For you, the war is over," which was something that thousands of American flyers heard during the war.
Luck of the Draw is my grandfather Frank Murphy's memoir about his experiences in World War II. He and his fellow men fought for the freedoms that we have today. He is actually featured in Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg's upcoming TV show for Apple called Masters of the Air. But in the meantime, you can read all about Frank and his fellow men in Luck of the Draw.
Chloe, thank you for having that put together for us.
The last part isn't really supposed to be in there, but that's okay. I don't need to do an advertisement for you guys tonight, but that's a video that I made for social media because I feel like it's really important for people to hear it in my grandfather's own words.
Absolutely. And to that point, Elizabeth, you're his daughter. And y'all have just learned more about Frank Murphy's experience in the 8th Air Force than I think you knew growing up with him as your father. And you mentioned this in your foreword that as so many other World War II veterans, they tended not to talk about these things. So when the truth began to come out and he began to work on his story, what was your reaction? What was it like realizing that this guy who's just your dad turns out to be this American hero?
Well, as I wrote in the foreword, I think I was maybe 11 or 12 when he started talking about having been a navigator during the war, parachuting out, being injured, and being a prisoner of war. And also the timing of the Great Escape movie that came out that I went to see, and he told me he was a prisoner in that same prison camp, and they had tried to tunnel out, and their tunnel collapsed. And even then it was fascinating, but he never expounded on it. But my mother had made this notebook, this red notebook, that had a lot of, it had Western Union telegrams that had gone to his parents. It had letters he'd sent to his mother, who he loved very much, and his prison ID, that y'all saw. And I was always fascinated when I would take it down off the bookshelf and look at it, so much so that I took it to my freshman history class when I was at Mercer University. But really, all those years passed and intervened, and he never talked about it. And I've got cousins here tonight that will attest to that. He never talked about it. And then I started writing a book, I don't know, 1990, 91, and Dad came to me and said he was thinking about writing a book for the family. And I had no idea that it was going to be about World War II until we were living in Dallas, Texas. He did send me Munster raids, and he would send me envelopes of, I guess, parts of the book. And then when he got linked up with the publisher here in Atlanta, and we knew it was going to be published, I still didn't know what it was going to be about. He hadn't really said that it was going to be mostly about the war. And so he sent all of us a copy in Texas. And we all read it, and that's when I learned his story. And as I've said before, it seemed like a movie. It didn't seem like real life.
His experiences, when y'all read the book, you'll get some of these details. And I was sharing with them before, one of the things that's remarkable about Frank's memoir is that there are a lot of World War II soldier, sailor, airman experience memoirs out there, but Frank, very thoughtful, as Gordon said, very wise, he puts his personal experiences into a larger context of the war. The growth of the 8th Air Force, the strategic bombing campaign, what it was like trying to fight against the greatest air power that had existed up to that point. So that context, coupled with personal experiences, is something that can speak to everyone. But obviously, it's going to speak to his family even more. As you said, he's writing this book for his family. So Chloe, another generation of Murphys have come down, and you're the most, not quite the most recent, but you're the generation that's not supposed to know or appreciate any of this. And
right.
Yet, knowing that you have this past in it, it must have meant a great deal to you to know this story and want to share it in the same way Frank did.
Well, you know, the whole reason that I know about my grandfather's experiences are because of my cousin who's here tonight, Ben, who ended up pursuing a career in the military. And so on the weekends, we would sleep over at Grandma and Grandpa's house in Roswell, and they would pick us up from school, and I would suffer through dinner listening to Ben ask Grandpa everything about World War II, and I just wanted to play with Barbies and go home and watch Nickelodeon. But now, how happy am I that I listened to those stories and I learned all of those things. But they were all just bits and pieces of stories, right? He loved to tell us that when General Patton liberated the prison camp, that he walked up to my grandfather's group and said, "I'm going to kill these sons of bitches for this," right? And that was kind of one of the only stories I really remembered. But when I was in college, I still don't know what it was. My grandfather and I were very close, and so was Ben. We were, my cousin, his mother passed away when he was 5, and we became like brother and sister. And so my cousin and I, we experienced these stories together. And when I was in college and I studied abroad in England, I don't really know what it was. You know, you just get an idea, and I said, "I'm going to go to your Air Force base." And so he arranged for me to take a train and meet this little couple who was out there who have now turned Thorpe Abbott's into a museum. So I spent the day out there, and I had a cell phone, and I called him, and he had just been diagnosed with cancer. And I said, "I'm here on the runway," and he cried. And that was the first time I ever heard my grandfather cry. And it wasn't until a few years later that my life changed here at the Atlanta History Center, because Don Miller, who wrote Masters of the Air, was speaking here. And that's when it all clicked for me. I was now a journalist, and I really wanted to learn more. But I never knew that this was going to turn into number 26 in the entire world on Amazon last week, right? So, I mean, he wrote an amazing story and did a lot of research. I'm just shouting it from the rooftops. We didn't do anything. We're just here to make sure it, gets the spotlight it needs.
But shouting these stories and the importance of them from the rooftops is an important job. That's why it's so important that y'all have republished this book. It's why places like the Atlanta History Center are so important, because they share those stories. And that's one of the things I learned. He didn't talk much about it when you were growing up, and you heard little pieces and bits of stories.
I assumed everybody had a grandfather that was in World War II. I didn't realize that his experiences were so unique.
And that's the interesting thing. I remember when I was doing these interviews and I would go to reunions, so many veterans didn't talk about it when they came back home and they started building families and building careers. I think because so many of them had been in the war, no one wanted to hear about it. Yes, I know, I was there, Bob. Let's stop talking about it.
Yeah.
But later on, when they started realizing the impact they had on the United States and on the world, they would start talking to each other. And you've mentioned that you're with the 100th Bomb Group Association, and they would start having these reunions. And folks, one of the greatest privileges in my life is to get to go to some of these reunions and see some of these World War II veterans. You don't have to say a word. You just need to start putting 2 or 3 of them together. And they start telling stories that will send shivers down your spine, give you belly laughs, set the hairs on the back of your neck on in it. And you're with the 100th Bomb Group Association now.
Yeah, so I'm on the board of directors now, but I think something that my mom and I talk about a lot is that in the book he writes, and I'll butcher the sentence, but you guys can find it when you get your copy tonight. It says that, any idea, they would shake the idea of the notion that they were heroes.
It's the only thing they were wrong about, I would argue, but.
And so, they felt like this was their duty, and they came back, and my grandfather went back to Emory University on the GI Bill. And my grandmother, who's here tonight, she was just telling the Atlanta Journal the other week in this big interview that she did, and with CNN, she did a TV interview a few weeks ago with Jake Tapper. She said that when she got married to Grandpa, that she didn't even know that he was a prisoner of war, that it was his mother that told her that he had been a prisoner of war.
Right.
I
And-
think they just felt like this was their duty to serve their country and come back, and just they wanted to be treated like regular people. Now in hindsight though, and I've been doing more research, I think that he suffered from post-traumatic stress.
Right, and that's something, you know, to put into context too. I don't know how many of y'all are aficionados of the air war over Europe, but placing it in context, when the United States got involved, Great Britain had already been involved for 2 years. The Luftwaffe was the largest, most powerful air force in the world. It had been training with professional pilots, professional navigators, professional ground crew who had been practicing their art for years and years. And when the United States gets involved, folks like your granddad and your dad, they're citizen soldiers. They answer the call of duty and they sign up and they have to learn this literally on the fly, if you'll pardon the pun. And it's what makes ordinary men extraordinary, is to do these things. And so they go over and they're trying to prove the concept of strategic bombing, which is the idea that you can use airplanes to, if not outright win the war, to have such an effect on the enemy's ability to wage war that the war is over quicker. And this was a theory. And these young men have to prove that theory early on in the war. And Frank Murphy was one of the first bomb groups to go over to England and fly these missions. Well, these missions are dangerous. There are lots of flak guns that are firing at these airplanes. There are hundreds of fighters attacking them. Each B-17 or B-24 has a crew of 10. So if a plane gets hit, if it explodes in midair, if it goes down, that's 10 men that are killed, wounded, or missing. And the United States eventually starts building 50,000 airplanes a year. That's not what's going on in 1942 and 43. These young men are having to carry that. And the experiences Frank talks about in the book they're heart-shattering. And you wonder how these regular people were able to do it. You've got that quote of him flying through the flak, and how that worked, and how it was just, he doesn't come out and call himself a coward, but he does say that it's one of the scariest things he's ever been through. And when you read those stories, you know, you hear those things around, about General Patton coming in. When you read those stories about the fear and the experience of that, what is that like? How does that make you appreciate him coming back and being just a regular guy even more?
Well, now I've had time to reflect. Growing up in the 60s, I look back and I think he was just 20 years removed from that experience, He sometimes talked about the shrapnel in his shoulder hurting him, but very, very, very little. But now, after reading the book and learning so much more, I realize how it's a story of survival, how resilient he was, his perseverance, and how patient he was. And we've talked a lot about that because my mother's not a patient woman. But my dad was the most patient person, and my cousin's here tonight. Everybody loved his advice. He gave such good, sound advice, never condescending, a great listener. And I think being a prisoner of war made him, I think he could, Chloe and I've talked about this, I think he felt like he could handle anything. Nothing, as Chloe said, nothing ruffled him. I don't ever remember him really freaking out over anything. So he just, and I think that probably all came from that experience of being a prisoner of war. But he never told me one story. By the time the grandchildren came along, the floodgates were open. He hadn't written his book. It predates that. They were small children. And he was talking. I didn't know what was going on those weekends. I knew Ben was always playing soldier. He was always playing Army. I knew that. Chloe was playing Barbies, but I really didn't know until Chloe got so involved with it how much my dad had shared over those weekends.
I think he had survivor's guilt. I know he did because he writes in the book about not understanding. And one of my favorite quotes in the book is that a bullet either had your name on it or it didn't. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that it came down to the luck of the draw. And I would say that maybe there was a slight sense of relief to be captured, to at least have survived. But then also as a mother reading this book, just would like to say as a mother of 2 boys, I cannot imagine what his mother was going through and his father not knowing what had happened to him. They didn't know where he was. They didn't know if he was alive or dead. And Grandma loves to tell the story of how his father called the White House every single day and demanding to know, where is my son? And then they finally let them know that he was a prisoner of war, and then the telegrams start. And when you read in those telegrams of how Grandpa apologizes for asking for her to send basic things like socks or chocolate, and he says, when I come home, I won't be so greedy. Can you imagine? You know, he apologizes for it. Meanwhile, never knowing when the war will end and if he'll ever make it back.
Right. So he flies 21 combat missions over occupied Europe and Germany.
And you only have to fly 25 to go home.
Right. It was that close.
How upsetting is that?
So he flies 21 combat missions. Then he's captured as a POW and spends the rest of the war in a POW camp, like the Great Escape. He was not in the Great Escape. He didn't get out. Right. They were trying to dig a tunnel under their barracks, and the Great Escape happened, and then they clamped everything down and they took their tunnel away. And so he was in a POW camp for the rest of the war, with minimal, hygienic facilities. The food is very basic. Remember, Germany is under blockade, and its resources are being crimped and crimped and crimped by the very Air Force that he had been a part of. And so they're getting to the point where it is difficult to feed the German population, much less the prisoners of war. And so as the war starts to come to a close, and the Soviets are closing in from the east, the Americans are closing in from the west, they're trying to keep these camps, I'm not even sure why, from being captured. They're trying to make it last as long as they can for these POWs, Kriegies as they call them. And so at Stalag Luft 3, he's there for most of the time. When they start to move them, it's in the middle of winter, and they have to go on a truck for a little bit, and then a train, and then they have to march in some of the coldest, most wet, awful weather. And he talks about men falling by the wayside who couldn't continue. And it comes down to that luck of the draw and that willingness to go on, knowing that if they're moving us around this much, this war is almost over.
And they're walking through the same towns that they had bombed. So they're getting rocks thrown at them. Their fellow men are collapsing all around them. They're carrying each other on their backs, making sleds. And my grandfather, he had a pair of leather shoes, and he traded shoes with, you said a local, but yeah, with someone, and he had these wooden clogs. And I have one of those clogs that sits in my office, and that, when you think it's cold when you go to get a cup of coffee, or you're complaining about the weather walking to your office or something, imagine what they went through. My grandfather said they grabbed their pitiful belongings. They had barely anything. And then they were crammed in boxcars for several days, with the Germans refused to open it even for a little bit of sunlight or fresh air, or for them to go to the bathroom.
Right.
And then when they're taken to Stalag 7A, that prison camp, I believe, was meant for 10,000 people, and there were 100,000 in there.
Right. And it was eventually liberated by Patton and the 14th Armored Division.
But something, though, that we do think that's really profound, that who here has not read the book? If you could raise your hand. Great.
Oh,
okay.
They're in for a treat.
Very great. That's good. Steve, you better read it. Talk to them, Mom, about music. Music saved his life.
Yeah, and I was just reading about that today. Well, Dad loved music, played the clarinet and the saxophone in his teens and into college. It was in WSB, played on the radio. when he was captured as a prisoner of war, he learned they had what they called the Kriegi Band, and he immediately wanted to be a part of it, quote, auditioned. It says the YMCA loaned instruments. He got a clarinet, and they made him first clarinet, and they had built a theater, and they put on shows, not dances, but they put on shows, and they played all the music of the time, and I think that was his greatest outlet. He writes besides reading and walking around the camp. So he loved being able to play in the Kriegi Band, and in the book there's a photo. There's at least 1 or 2 photos of him in the band.
Which is unbelievable to me.
Which is
that,
unbelievable, I know.
Someone snapping pictures in the war and that we
Well, the most
have
amazing
them.
photo is when they're liberated, and there's that photo, and there's Dad. You know, it looks like he had a little gunny sack over his shoulder, like a hobo, you know. And he lost 50 pounds by the
Well,
time
when
he
he
got
went
out.
to the other prison camp, and something that I think is so interesting is that first prison camp was an officers' camp.
Right.
And so actually, when I went to England for to the set of Masters of the Air, the TV show that's going to come out on Apple about the 100th Bomb Group, they rebuilt Stalag Luft 3. And so I got to go walk it. And so these stories I heard about and read about, I see you, Sue, nodding your head. I got to go there and actually walk through what it would have been like. And you know, Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, they're gonna do it right. And everything in there was just crazy, amazing, but terrifying to be there, and how cold it must have been and how hungry they must have been. And then imagine you go from there, which is like a country club, and then you go to Stalag 7A after this death march where hundreds died, and then you go and there's lice and dysentery and there's no food, and now you're rapidly losing weight, and now you have pneumonia, and terrible. Good thing he was only there for a few months though.
Right. And then you saw his prisoner information card flash up on the screen. I don't know if you saw a good version of that picture. He really does look like a hobo. He is.
That was my favorite thing in the notebook. I was fascinated. That's my dad?
Well, I didn't know the story that you just told us backstage about how he got that card.
So
We learned something tonight.
the Germans are very German, and they kept a card, an information card on every one of the prisoners. And when the prisoners would move from one camp to the other, that card would go with them. And he's at Stalag Luft 3 for over a year. They move them to 7A, and 14th Armored Division comes in and liberates them. Well, what's the first thing Frank Murphy thinks about? Running out the gates, getting food? He's like, no. This is what he,
Yeah.
because when we had our exhibit here, we have that prisoner information card, and we had it on display, and y'all have it. How does someone get that? And he said, I just walked right into the offices, found where the card files were, and flipped through and found mine because I wanted to know what the Germans knew about me. And he kept that card. It's like, what a amazing souvenir.
Well, the stuff he
take
got
it
home
from.
with. I mean, what's the key to the airplane?
Yeah, I mean, there's
the
so
stuff
many.
Dad got home with is amazing.
Yeah.
Museum people love that stuff.
Yeah.
We love folks who hang on to that little
He got
minutia.
home with that red fez from Morocco. That story, when the plane broke down and they had a little layover there. I used to play with that. I used to wear that little fez. It's in a museum now. And there are all kinds of pictures. Dad was bad as we are. He's wearing that little fez. Several photos of him in the book with that fez on. So.
Well, he, and that's the thing. It's going through what he went through. As you say, he was always so upbeat. Even in the book, the music kept him going, and knowing what he went through and still being able to smile and to laugh about some of these stories, I think says a lot about him, but it's also representative of that esprit de corps that, Chloe, that you were talking about, that he and his comrades shared. So I wonder, you've been involved with some of these reunions and some of the groups. I would love to hear you talk a little bit about your impressions of seeing other vets besides your granddad and sort of interacting with them and what it's like to work your way into that brotherhood.
Well, Don Miller said you need to go to the next reunion in Palm Springs. And this was like a decade ago. And so I convinced my dad, who is from Athens, Greece, who, doesn't have much to say about the World War II or anything, but he went with me because he's always up for an adventure. And we went, and it was at like Palm Springs, like Air Museum or something like that. And I showed up and I introduced myself, and they immediately started treating me like royalty. Like, this is Frank Murphy's granddaughter. They immediately embraced me. And I didn't know that much about my grandfather's story at this point. And I was 25. I'm 36 now. And so it's the family I never knew that I needed, and I'm so happy I have them now. I mean, some of these people are my best friends. I talked to a guy named Mike Faley, who's a historian on an almost daily basis. By day, he's a heavy metal band manager. By night, he's a 100th bomb group enthusiast. Those are the best. And he doesn't even have anybody in his family who was in the war. One of the favorite stories I love to tell is that my grandfather was shot down during what's known as Black Week, and because of the amount of casualties that the 8th Air Force suffered. And my grandfather was shot down on October 10th, and that day, 13 planes went out from the 100th bomb group. 12 were shot down, 1 returned, and 2 men on my grandfather's crew died that day, including the tail gunner. The one that made it back that day was piloted by Rosie Rosenthal. Guess who is one of my best friends today?
Rosie Rosenthal.
Son. Dan. And so I just think it's just so funny how life comes full circle. Imagine you're being shot down in a German farmer's field, and one day you're going to be lucky enough to live and have children and grandchildren, and one of those grandchildren is going to carry the torch for you. The unlikely one. I mean, we all are, and become friends with, this hero and his son one day. And so I just really think it's important to look at your past, because if you don't look at your past, you can't look to the future. And history repeats itself. I'm not saying that there are enormous parallels to Ukraine, but there is war and evil all over the world. And we need to appreciate all of our veterans and listen to all of their stories. And I just think that it's really important to keep the memories alive. And that is what I'm trying to do in my own way. And just, everybody loves a grandfather or loves someone in their family or a friend who's served, or if not, you should. And so I just think it's important to continue to share. My cousin, who served in the military and did multiple tours overseas. I was talking to Bob Woodruff the other day, who you might know from ABC News, and he had an IED explode next to him in Iraq, and this was like 20 years ago. And he started the Bob Woodruff Foundation. And it's just so important for us to all talk to the veterans in our lives and ask them to share if they want.
If they want, yeah. And that's the gospel. You just gave the gospel of history is why it's important to continue this information and share these stories with the next generation. Like Frank said, they fought for the right to forget them, which is why we should remember them.
And don't think it could never happen again. I mean, none of us thought a pandemic could happen, no matter your political views. Crazy things happen. You never know. The freedoms that we have today are so fragile.
I remember another quote in our interview that we was talking about, and he said, and then I want to get to questions. Speaking of sharing history, I want to make sure we've got time for y'all's questions. He said that our freedoms are rooted in the past. Very, very introspective and very appreciative of those who came before him, just as we are of he and his generation. He understood that these things did not happen by accident, that they were the actions of people who viciously defended their freedoms and the rights of others, and being willing to sacrifice and put forward everything they have or could have for the future of strangers, for us tonight, I think is one of the most remarkable aspects of Frank Murphy and the generation to which he does belong. So, about to tear up just thinking about him. So someone else, Claire, I think if folks have questions, I think Claire is back there with a microphone, so we would love to hear what you have to say.
Hello, I'm here in honor of my father, Murray. He was a bombardier in the 96 group, and I was surprised to learn from you folks said, and that what I've heard before, that most or many veterans didn't speak about it, but I grew up with it and the history and know the Air Force theme song and all that. We go into the wild blue. Anyway, just wanted to, and I glanced through the book before I came in here, and some of the sentences of Frank were exactly the sentences that my father shared with me. That's it.
Yeah, hi, Chloe Elizabeth. I'm Jeff Johnson with the 8th Air Force Historical Society Georgia chapter with my posse here, and
Great.
also with the Atlanta World War II Roundtable. And one, yeah, I was the first voice you heard on the video. That was a surprise, but thank you. But no,
That's your voice?
that's my voice.
No way.
Yeah, strategic daylight. Yeah, that
Oh,
was
I like that. Oh my God, that's
precision
wait,
bombing. Yeah.
Give him a round of applause.
Oh,
That's cool.
okay.
I can also do this is CNN, if you remember James Earl Jones. But no, to my question, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, I remember a television show that was set at Stalag 13 called Hogan's Heroes. And I know that World War II vets who were POWs had mixed feelings about that television program. Some liked it, some didn't. And I'm just wondering, Chloe or Elizabeth, if you remember what Frank thought of that TV show.
I never watched it. So, no, I don't know.
You don't know? Ben, do you know?
I don't remember Grandpa saying anything. He was aware of the show, or taking a comment on it.
Grandma, do you know? Well, I know that, so we don't have that answer, but here's the answer I do have. He loved Band of Brothers, okay, later, right? And he always said that The Great Escape with Steve McQueen was accurate. So those are the two things that I do know, which is nice, and he loved the Memphis Belle. John O'Neill is sitting behind you, and John knew my grandfather really well. Do you know if he liked Hogan's Heroes?
Yes. He thought it was funny.
And it was, I mean, yeah.
My father was of the 8th that had the POW experience or knew it, but I remember him telling me, because I asked him that same question many years ago, and he said, that was funny, but not real.
John O'Neill and his wife Sue are here, and if it wasn't for John's dad, there would never be Luck of the Draw, because his dad was the first to publish the book over 20 years ago. So that's really amazing.
Yeah.
I just got one question, one comment. Which bomb squadron was he in? My dad was in the 418th of the
He
100.
was in the 418th.
My dad was in the 418th.
Wow.
And can't believe it bothers me to say this. My other second comment is, you've probably been there since I have. I went to Thorpe Abbott's in 2006, and if you get a chance to go there, it's not something you take a whole trip to go see. It's not that much there, but if it means anything to you, it's pretty inspirational.
It's amazing.
You should tell that story. when Carol Batley took you in.
I did. Well, Thorpe Abbott's, which is the Air Force base that he flew out of outside of London, it's now a museum, and it's not overgrown anymore, and it's run by a really cute couple named Ron and Carol, so they need our donations and they need money to continue. But inside the air traffic control tower are mannequins with real A2 jackets and my grandfather's fez that he got when they landed in North Africa after their plane was badly damaged. And we walked in there, and Carol unlocks it for me, and we go up in there, and she's like, 4 feet tall, and we go in there, and I follow her, and she says, "Hello, boys," as if they were all there, and it was crazy. I was like freaked out and excited, and had my hair stood up all over my arms, but it was the coolest thing. So yes, you should go for a day trip if you go to London.
Yeah, my name is Joe Cullen. I live in Atlanta here, and my dad was the 96 bomb group, so I think we have another 96 bomb group. But I just want to commend you for a great presentation tonight and highlighting such a great, presentation with everything. And I want to share with you, too, that my dad never had done any conversation about this until I pushed him. And then when we started pushing him, we were 5 in our family, and my brother too. And so we finally got him to open up. He went to West Point, graduated in June '43, and his roommate was Stan Pace. He graduated #1 in his class. He flew B-24s in Libya. And then Dad went on to fly 17s, did 25 missions, and but I just remember him always saying when he opened up, "Oh God, we're going to go out with the bloody 100 today," and he crosses, do a cross, God bless you, and because he said, the ME-109s and the Messerschmitts respected the firepower of the square D, and his. They took the most casualties, and but anyway, this book here, the Snetherton Heath book, is about the whole 96 bomb group, and every one of his missions are posted in here. And so before he passed at 93, I had him go through this book and mark every one of his missions and where he was flying, high, low, to the left, to the right, and if he was going to fly with the 100th. And he used to discuss that they get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to form up. It would take them like 2 hours to form up before they go over the channel. And he said they lose at least 2 or 3 aircraft. They collide at night because the conditions. But anyway, I'll finish up here. But I agree with you. You should go over there, and that's one of my things. I want to go over to Norfolk and find all these bases. The Snetherton Heath base, where the 96 was out of, I guess right now is a racetrack and just a small little field. So, but they have a little statue there to commemorate that. So, but anyway, job well done. I can't read the book. So thank you.
Thank you.
My dad was a B-17 pilot, 95th Bomb Group. And I understand the 95th and the 100th have a relationship. I think they share some museum space in Tucson. Anyhow, he flew out of Horham in 1944, flew 35 missions. And he passed away at the age of 102 last 2 months ago in January.
Oh, wow.
And my wife and I, Susan and I, have been to a number of 95th Bomb Group reunions, and we've been to his base in England on 2 occasions. Horham, he flew out of Horham. They also have an excellent museum there, and they've preserved the runway and a lot of the Quonset huts and so forth. Anyhow, we're going to do one more trip over there. In June, my siblings and our spouses are going to take some of my dad's ashes and spread them on the runway there as a sort of a final remembrance of him. Well, not final, but a remembrance of him. So just thought I would share that with you. Thank you.
I love that. I love hearing all of this.
We have one more question. Oh, the pressure's on.
Okay, there's actually two.
We'll do two.
Oh, there's two.
All
Okay,
right.
there's two questions.
We'll do two.
Had
This
her
man
hand up
right
for a
here.
while.
This man right here was right here.
Yes, thank you for a great presentation. I'm Kevin Laddie, and just want to honor my dad. He's 97 years old, Howard Laddie. He was with the 44th Bomb Group.
Oh, wow.
Flew 30 missions.
Oh, my God.
How sweet is that?
But I did have a question.
We should have had him up here.
He's got some great stories. Do you know how many surviving members there are from the 100th Bomb Group?
Oh, gosh.
Well, I've met a few, but I know that less and less come to the reunions now. John, do you have any idea how many members of the 100th are surviving today?
I don't, but I know that there's less than 5 that now physically attend the reunion.
Okay.
Mike might know that answer.
Okay.
Right, I understand statistically there were 16 million World War II veterans. Today there's about 160,000, so we're down to the last 1%.
The only one that I still see is John Lucky Luckadoo, who's now 101, and he wrote a great book with Kevin Maurer last year called Damn Lucky. So you should also get that book as well.
Chloe, can I show a shout out? Lucky will be in Savannah the day before you and Liz come down.
Oh.
At the museum talking about.
Come with us to Pooler, Georgia, right outside. Do a ghost tour and then come listen to us speak again. It'll be really fun. Members of Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg's production company will be there too. So it'll be really special. All right, hi.
It's obvious how important these stories are. Can you give us any advice on how we should or could possibly save these stories or these artifacts and preserve them for the future?
Oh, that's an excellent question. They obviously need to be taken care of, even things you think are not that important, like a Fez, right? Why does that? Fez is not standard American Air Force issue piece, but it has a wonderful story that goes to it. You can keep it in the family if you take care of it. You can give it to an institution that will preserve it and have it there not only for the general public, but for your family for years and years to come. The Atlanta History Center is certainly one such organization, but I also want to give a plug for a couple of people have mentioned it down in Pooler at the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum. If you can't make it to Thorpe Abbott's across the ocean, Savannah's not that far away, and they have some amazing stories. They have some amazing exhibits, and that's their focus is the 8th Air Force and its experiences during the World War II.
So what I would say is anybody here tonight that has something in a closet or in an attic or in a basement or at a family member's house, dust it off. Find John O'Neill tonight before he leaves, and he was just recently the president of the board of directors for the museum, and you can loan it out. So you can just sign a loan agreement. You don't have to say goodbye to it forever, and that's what we have done. We've loaned it to the 8th Air Force Museum and to the 100th Bomb Group Foundation. I selfishly still have the shoe that he marched in, and I'm not quite ready to give that up, but everything else is there. So I highly suggest that. I don't agree with keeping it in the family. I know it's hard to let go, but I think it should be shared with everyone. So I really feel strongly about that. But again, loan it out. And if my kids want to go to college one day and bring something, they can go with my permission, sign it out,
Right.
And also, I'm just so excited for all of us to see Masters of the Air this fall. It's going to reignite something, and it's going to teach so many young millennials and Gen Zers about what you and so many men and women, what they went through. So it's going to come out soon, and it's really exciting that this is going to be a huge topic of conversation around the world.
Right, and I think, Claire, we're probably out of time, aren't we? Because I'll go to 11 tonight. I'll go to 11.
And we have Southside Steve here, the famous radio host, so he might close this all out. You never know.
Yeah, well, and I want to say something that the great Gordon said when we were talking backstage too. is that going out and thinking about how we can keep these stories alive. Like you say, go and share it because America is really looking for stories that unite us, that show that there are still ways to have a righteous cause, that there are things that can bring us together, that there are good causes to fight for, that there were good people that fight for good causes and can continue to do so today and tomorrow. Frank Murphy was one of those in 1940. We've got people now, and Masters of the Air is going to tell, along with other people besides Frank, tell those stories of people who were, again, just ordinary people, just regular guys that went and dedicated themselves to a higher purpose. And that is a lesson that we can all learn from and grow from.
Well, this reminds me of something.
Yes.
So my dad's career as a lawyer, doing contracts for airplanes for Lockheed, Georgia, took him all over the world. And he always said the same thing, this is the greatest country on earth, when he would come home. Although he and my mother went to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia on and off for 10 years where he ran the Lockheed, Georgia office. And he was so patriotic, and he was just the kind of man or person that, my mother will attest to this, that when he heard the Star Spangled Banner, he'd get tears in his eyes. He was just, he loved America, he loved his country, he was very patriotic. Right, Mom? Yes, that's true.
He was. This American flag pin I have on my lapel, guess who gave this to me?
Aw.
I've been hanging on that for a long time.
And he would be so proud of Chloe, and he is proud, as my mother just said. He is proud that she's, once again, we're shining a light on the mighty eighth.
I think the last thing we'll say is that sometimes it feels like this country is more divided than ever. And I hope that stories like Frank's and shows like Masters of the Air and even movies like Top Gun remind us all why we are so lucky to live in the country that we live in, and hopefully ignite some patriotism in this country, because boy, do we need it. So thank you all for your time.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Uh-oh.
One more?
Okay, one more.
One more. I'm Southside Steve. I was on Rock 100.5 and 96 Rock. I've been on Atlanta radio for 30 years. Currently unemployed, so if you own a radio. My wife Amanda went to college at Auburn with Chloe, and it's a pleasure, Liz, to finally meet you.
Thank you.
And I don't know if your feet are as good looking as your daughter's, but...
He has a foot thing. You can Google it.
Oh.
It's made national news.
Pretty good for my age, I would say.
Can't help to but it was such a pleasure to meet Miss Murphy over there, Frank Murphy's lovely wife and your mother. And to me, the story's incredible, and I think a lot of us, Memphis Belle's where my head goes immediately. You think of that movie, and to me, I just look at what those guys went through. I think it created the drama. You realize that most people were only going to make it through 4 or 5 missions. If you got to 25, you were out. Your grandfather, your father shot down in 21. But, when you look at this movie, it's going to be made. If Tom Hanks is jumping in, and obviously the book, and Chloe, what you've done on CNN to highlight this is incredible. I just want to say that everybody's talking about it. That's why me and my wife are here too, and I'm so proud of you. And I know your grandfather would be so proud of you too. But I have to wonder, who's going to play your grandfather? Who's going to play Dad? Do we know?
We met him. Yes, we know.
We know him. His name is Jonas Moore, and he's very sweet. And he's an unknown. And the best part is that if you download the audiobook, he narrates the audiobook. So you guys will get to hear his beautiful Southern accent that he worked very, very hard on. So give him a break, okay? Give him a break. He did the best he could. So, well, listen, I look forward to meeting you guys out there. So stick around for a glass of wine if you can. I know it's a Monday, but thank you all for coming out.
Chloe and Liz.